after we talked about the planning board, and Neil asked me something about the planning board, and I was kind of confused about it, and I was embarrassed, in fact, because what we did at the planning board, and I couldn't answer it, so it bothered me for a couple of nights after that, and I got to thinking of it, and I reiterated and remembered what I had forgot, and as I'm going to tell a little bit more about the planning board, I stand to be corrected on all the things I did in the previous tape, of course, because it was just at the spur of the moment I did it. But anyway, I'd like to show you this picture of the planning board, if I may.
Okay.
And starting...
Now, what year would this be, Art?
This is about 1952 or so.
Okay, 1952.
And starting here on the planning board, left to right, was Francis McGann, and then Art Korn, James Keyes, Jimmy Shea, Ed Leipheimer, County Commissioner Willis Gary, Gene Daly, Frank Gorsh, and Jimmy Shea, the mayor of Walkerville.
Okay.
In that picture there. And so a further correction was that I was not on the planning board for 20 years. I was on the planning board for 4 years, and I was on the Democratic committee when we first started for 20 years, so we just reversed around. When we had the planning board, the first thing we did when we joined was to find out from the Chamber of Commerce how the other cities liked it, and then how, if they had any planning board, like Great Falls and different places like that, what their thoughts were about the planning board and everything else. Well, by the time we got that generated, it was about 2 years past, because we only went once a month. And I will say this much, this was a good bunch. I don't think there was ever a meeting that we had in 1 year that we didn't have a full quorum. I mean, everybody was concerned about planning in Butte. Of course, we had a lot of criticism about it. But I do remember that when we started, the first thing we decided was that we would, because the flow of traffic was going, because the west side was predominantly the better part of Butte and mostly populated. So it seemed like everybody from the west side was coming in and going right directly west on Butte, on Park Street. So we recommended that one-way traffic on Park Street, and then we recommended that that'd be going east on Park Street, and then going west on Broadway and west on Galena. Now the reason for that is that Galena Street in that year was pretty well covered with businesses. Eddie Price had a car agency on Galena Street. I'm not sure whether Leipheimer, I'm not sure whether Lescovar had one on Galena, but then Howard, a fellow named Howard, I don't know his first name, last name, had the Buick agency where the Gold Rush Casino is. And then on the next corner was the Palmy cleaning house, stuff like that. So there's a lot of business on Galena Street at that time. So that's why we recommended going west on Galena Street. So there was east on Park, west on Galena, and west on Broadway. Well, I talked to Ed Leipheimer, and he's still he's a graduate. Him and I graduated at U High in '32. And I asked him if he thought much about the planning board, and he said, Art, that's so long ago. He said, I don't remember too much about it, Well, anyway, I do know that we did say that Front Street would be the southern boundary of the zoning of the city of Butte, the primary object of Butte, and the west end would be going out towards the School of Mines, and the north end, I believe, was Granite Street, and then the east side was kind of blank to me, but I think it seems to me like it was, for some reason, Ohio, and then we changed it to closer this way anyway, but I don't remember ever accepting all that. One family, the residential area was the west side, and racetrack, and Home Avenue. Now the boulevard was industrial, light industrial, and they protested. In fact, I got a lot of criticism about that. But then we had the Montana Pole Plant there, and we had the Highway Department, we had the the 2 bars and everything else, so the planning board thought it was better if we adjusted it that way. And to show you what effect that had on it, when the highway bought my house, I built a brand new brick house, 3-bedroom brick house there, when I was moved from 1912 Jackson Street to 1914 Washington Street. And when I sold that house, after Rolly and I got married, the realtor told me, he said, if that house was built in the racetrack division or Holmatton, and it'd be worth $10,000 or $15,000 more, because it was in an industrial area. And likewise, Meadville and McQueen were highly industrial, and Harrison Avenue was light industrial, you know what I mean? And anyway, that's how I come to think of it, because I laid awake and thinking of these things, and I stand to be corrected, but as far as I was concerned, this is what the planning board did in 4 years. And then I know when we broke up, when we dissolved at the end of 4 years, that they didn't appoint another zoning board for some time, because we were more or less, all of us got calls on it, criticizing what we did, you know what I mean? There wasn't one of us that didn't get criticized on it, you know what I mean? And we thought, well, we wouldn't. So then they didn't appoint, the county commissioners at that time didn't appoint a new planning board for 4 or 5 years, or 3-4 years. And anyway, I forget who it was, called me. 2 people called me. The first people called me and asked me if I had any of the old charts. I had an apple box that was this big and this full of correspondence, charts that our planning director from Pennsylvania had made. We hired him, a planner from Pennsylvania who did the job for Great Falls or Billings, I think. Anyway, I had a box there, so I gave it all what he wanted out of it. He took the whole thing. Then another person called me, and I said, no, I said, I already gave it to somebody, you know. But they wanted to use that for references, you know. And that's about the last thing I ever talked about there, you know what I mean. But then coming back, now is there any questions about
Well, on that, you know, it'd be good to get a map of the 1952 city boundaries, because some of the, like the soil conservation district still relies on that, but nobody seems to have those maps.
Yeah.
Where would a person find those now?
Gee, I don't know. We had the map of, we had changed our mind several times about this when we met, according to the conflict we had. In other words, Dexter edition was in the first zoning we had included in it, and they didn't want it included because they figured it'd be too high taxes. So then, upon the request of the zoning board, we changed it to light industrial. That's that little area up there, and they had a right in Dexter edition. They had that smelter there, not the smelter. What was it? I forget what that was there. That was just next smeltering plant where they used to ship their, I don't know what it was, ore or something through there and load up the box cars or something. Anyway, we put that industrial too, and I bet they're sorry they did too, because when they sold their homes there, they weren't worth that much either. So I mean, that's, and like I say, I could stand.
But this was a county zoning board.
This was the county planning board.
County planning board. Okay.
And the 3 commissioners sat in with us, you know what I mean?
Okay.
And like I said, as far as I was concerned, the 4 years that we served there, we had great cooperation and everything else like this. And it just, and then I talked to Ed Leipheimer, and I asked him if they ever adopted any of our suggestions. He said, Art, he said, that's such a long time ago, I can't remember. So, I mean, but I'm taking it for granted that Jimmy Shea will lighten up this one, or
Okay.
he has already probably lightened some of this up, and I could stand to be corrected on a lot of this.
You were going to talk about the pole plant out in the...
Yes, the pole plant was another reason we forgot on our first interview.
The
That
boulevard.
was,
Yeah.
that was, you know, it was, Boulevard was the most diversified industry around Butte. There was nobody that had Hanson Packing, Clark's Mill in the early stages, and the pole plant, and the brickyard, and the Montana Power, and the Colorado Smelter. All that unique there was all light businesses, plus the 2 saloons there, and the grocery stores. So that was a nice hub of an area there. Like I said, it was the only area in the town that had that many diversified little industries there. But now the pole plant, if you remember recently, they went over to a $4 million project now, and they're still working on it, taking that creosote, not anything under it, you know, and they're talking about people not living as long because they're drinking out of lead pipes, and their environmental impact, environmentalist, you know what I mean? Like I told you before, we swam in the copper water, we played in the Colorado smelter, and when we had 2 fires at the Montana pole plant, and the boulevard answered that, and also racetrack. It was such a big fire that we had racetrack, we had Floral Park, we had 6 trucks fighting that fire, and when we got through fighting a fire, we were in crease about this deep in our boots, and the only thing we could take it out with was get a 5-gallon can of gasoline and put our boot in there and rub it with our hands and get that creosote off. But that is what they put the creosote on, to put the posts in the ground to prevent them from rotting. And there was nothing more dangerous and hazardous than this creosote and that other stuff they put on these poles. And us firemen fought 2 fires there and walked through that creosote, inhaled that fume from that and everything else, and we all lived, I should say, I lived too long already. I'm 86 years old, you know what I mean? But all of us in the boulevard lived to a prime 80, 90 years old. I can name you half a dozen fellows that died 90 years old there. But I mean, this environmental stuff is, I think, carrying too far. You know, that's my opinion. Of course, they have some other ideas, but I just wanted to tell you that we fought those fires in creosote there. And then, of course, now, like you down there and look now, they're trying to cure this all up there. Years ago, they put it in 55-gallon drums, and they got 3 garages there with the drums in them yet. I don't know if the drums are still holding the contents or not, but you go down there now and they've spent, I think, what is it, $4 million or so on trying to clean it up, you know what I mean?
They're getting it done.
Well, they're getting it done, but it's a long process, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
I just wanted to include this in it because I forgot it, and I'm very happy to have the chance to, John, to go over this again and clarify.
I had one other question, Art. If we were trying to find out who would know the most factual information about the fires that took place in Butte in the 60s and 70s, would it be the state fire inspector's office? Who would have come to inspect those? You're a guy that knew a lot about fire issues. Where would we go to get that information?
Well, I think Holmes, I think he would have, that would have his, of course, in them
Who's
days
Holmes?
there, you know, we never had a fire marshal or anything else to take note of or anything else. It's just like when they had the Butte High School fire. There was 3 volunteer departments fighting the fires along with the city. And I don't remember if any, well, I imagine there was records of that, but as far as the pole plant, I don't think there was.
I'm talking about the fires in Uptown Butte.
The fire